thank you for coming back from lunch. It is the post-lunch slot, so you know what that means. It means we're all a bit like heavier and we need some energy. So I can't think of a better person to bring the energy to the stage than this next person. I nearly said next act then, like it was the X Factor, which it could be. Look, when I was discussing about ideas for this session with Annie, she said something really interesting, and I'm going to read it out. She said, people are often looking at creativity as a way of freeing their mind from other things, to use creativity to free people from the day-to-day. But actually, what's interesting is that we're looking at how to free the mind to be more creative. And that's exactly what I want us to be thinking about, because I don't know about you, but I'm not actually short of ideas. I don't struggle for ideas. It's actually putting them into practice that I struggle with, you know. And I could do without things like, you know, life admin. That's boring. HMRC, equally boring. That thought that you get at 1 a.m. that wakes you up and then you can't get back to sleep. That's annoying. And I'm sure we all have things going on in our world that we could just do with removing, frankly. So why not have someone to help us with this who is an actual professional well-being and mental health first aid instructor? Right? Sounds fancy and proper, right? No point me telling you. We want someone who actually knows what they're talking about. So let's free our mind with the amazing Annie Litchfield. You've got one. I'm going to try and fix it, though.
Hello. Are we all right? Is everybody okay? Now, before I start and I get into my little session today, I wanted to address the elephant in the room. I feel like you've all been invited on a bad Tinder date with my kind of promotional photograph that you saw of me up there. You were thinking, wow, who is this funky, pink-haired, mohawked individual that's going to be doing this speech today? She's still here, okay, under the extra padding and the blonde hair, and I'm just going to blame COVID, okay, but I'll talk to you a little bit about, I guess, my journey. God, that sounds so cheesy, doesn't it, when I say that, but I will be talking quite a lot, I guess, about my experiences, I guess, of mental health and kind of my self-care tips. But I'm actually here today to talk to you about the link between creativity and mental health, because obviously this is the creative climate, this is the conference that we're talking about, but really kind of, for me, it's about trying to think very much about what Paul said at the very beginning, is to think about how positive thoughts and positive mental health can really impact our creativity. So I want to talk about that link. To do that, I want to tell you a story, and it's a story, first of all, about a guy called Vinny. This is Vinny here. And I want to talk to you about his life, about his experiences with mental health, and I guess his struggles, I suppose, through life. It's probably quite a human story, obviously. He is a creative person, very much like you folks out here, but it's not marketing that's his bag. It's painting and drawing that's his sort of thing. And when I say his bag and his thing, he's absolutely passionate about painting and drawing. But I kind of want to take you back a kind of step or two, really, before I talk a little bit more about his life. Vinny's childhood was really quite difficult. He had a very difficult relationship with his father, and he had a very strained relationship with his mother as well. There's a real lack of attachment there. And so what happened for him as a child was he was sent from boarding school to boarding school, and so his childhood was really, really quite difficult. But to move that forward then to his career, he then equally found it difficult to find his place in life. Maybe you've all landed on marketing, and maybe that's really great and that's your passion. But he really, really struggled in life. And so the first thing he did was become an art dealer. So you think, brilliant, he's in the world of art. That was great for a time for Vinny. He travelled Europe. He got to live in different European cities. But he soon lost interest in that. Vinny then decided to move on to teaching. Great, again, really loved it. And whilst he was teaching, he really got into his theological studies. And he really started to really kind of work on his work within the church. So he became a church minister for a short time as well. And he thought, I guess, at the time he'd found some sort of purpose in his life. But he worked in really quite a poor community, and he really started to struggle with mental health at this point. really to the point where he actually gave away most of his possessions, and he himself then lived in quite a lot of poverty. His mental health was really starting to take a tumble at this point, and he actually lost his job in the church. They dismissed him. So he thought, okay, it's fine, it's all good, I can do this. I'm going to take on being an artist full time. Now, as you may very well think about being an artist, the money just doesn't roll in, okay? We can't all be like instant banksters, okay? And so it was tough for him at the time. Things were quite poor in terms of his life. Money was difficult. He was eating really poorly. He wasn't taking care of himself. He was drinking excessively. He was smoking excessively. He really was having a difficult time. But to help him as well through this particular time, he had his brother, Theo. He was really, really supportive. And also Theo's wife, Jo, and they kind of helped him out financially and really gave him some emotional support as well, which he really, really needed, because he was also experiencing seizures, he was having epilepsy, and so, it was really kind of difficult time for him. But in terms of support from a significant other, Vinny's really struggled to find that significant other. He's really found it quite hard. He fell in love with a woman who didn't share his feelings, felt completely humiliated by that. He then lived with another woman and her 2 children. But again, money was really tight, it was really difficult. He wasn't selling any of his paintings. He wasn't being well regarded. He wasn't being asked to do any work. He was devastated by the breakup of that relationship, and so he fled back to his parents. Whilst at his parents, he fell in love with a neighbour next door to his parents. Awesome. Unfortunately, she also had her own mental health problems and sadly made an attempt on her own life. It left Vinny completely and utterly bereft and beside himself, and really started to impact really on his mental health. So through his life, excuse me, I'm just having a glass of water. Through his life, he's kind of really struggled with that significant other and really kind of that sense of community and support. So what he decided to do was, right, okay, again, I've got this. I'm going to create my own little community of artists, and we're all going to hang out together, and we're all going to live together. This is what I'm going to do. And sadly, this was another thing for Vinny that didn't kind of work out. One thing he did do is he lived with his mate Paul. Now, Paul was also an artist. He was a painter. So they would spend their time, they would spend their days painting together, working together, kind of debating the world. If you've got friends like that, you put the world to rights, yeah? But generally, this was an alcohol-fueled kind of like process for them. During this time as well, Vinny's mental health was having its ups and downs, and he could have quite a lot of periods of incoherence, confusion, paranoia, delusions, hallucinations. So he really was finding life quite tricky, and that alongside his chronic illness of epilepsy and the seizures. During one particular debate with Paul, it got quite animated. They kind of had a bit of a fallout, and Vinny attacked Paul with a razor. He then turned that razor on himself, and he harmed himself. The next day, Vinny was admitted to hospital, and he spent quite a bit of time in and out of hospital. And during this time, his level of lucidity was kind of really low. He had a lot of these kind of paranoid, sort of psychotic episodes. And during that particular time, he was unable to paint. So for Vinny, this was a double blow, because I've already told you, this is his passion, this is what he loves to do. And when he was really, really poorly, he just wasn't able to do that. And so he found that very, very difficult. During times of calmness and when he was well, he could actually paint as well. He had a very difficult time. He had a very difficult life. Vinny, ups and downs, I think, with his mental health. He came out of hospital and he decided that he wanted to go and move to the country. So he moved to the country to kind of have a slower pace of life, to kind of be absorbed in nature, and he tried to use really kind of the inspiration of the outdoors to kind of inform some of the paintings and the work that he did. He went back to hospital again. He had another spell in hospital, and really it was at this time that he realised that the sadness was really going to be with him forever. That also he realised that if he hadn't had what he calls this cursed disease, the mental illness that he experienced, he felt that he could have been so much more successful in life, with his paintings, with his relationships, and that it cursed his life from a very, very young age. And sadly, it took his life. The mental illness took his life, and he died holding the hand of his brother, Theo. Now, this isn't necessarily the story that we know. This isn't the story that we know of Vinny. The clicker's not working now, Paul. Oh, there we go. This is the story that we know. The story that we know is of Vincent van Gogh. The story that we know is of the mad genius, the tortured artist. And it's almost like a story that we've romanticised. The idea that this guy, high from drinking absinthe, would chop his own ear off, and you can see the painting depicted there. In some way, we've romanticised the idea that for us to be creative, for those people that are really amazing geniuses at what they do, writers, sculptors, poets, painters, whatever it might be, they've got to in some way have suffered. They've got to be tortured. They've got to be having some mental health problems. But interestingly, with Van Gogh, what we find is that a lot of the paintings that he did when he was well. He wasn't doing it when he was really, really poorly, but that's really not the story that we know. And I wonder whether it gives us some comfort in some way to think that actually mental health, there's an upside to it, and perhaps that's where we've kind of romanticised that story. Other than right up until just before his death, as I say, he didn't really paint that much when he was very unwell, and just before his death, he did something like 70 paintings and 30 drawings just before he died. But generally, that's not the story that we know, actually. And if we think about that link between creativity and mental health, we have to think then, well, what does the research tell us? Well, it's kind of complicated. And what I would say is that any school of thought that you might have about this kind of topic, there's probably going to be some research, some commentary to support what you think, okay? So, there's the idea that we talked about of the mad genius stereotype that lives on in film, in media, and just kind of how we think about those creative people that are truly, truly gifted and truly, truly talented. The idea that in some way the mental health, the mental illness, should I say, fuels creativity. But if we look at Van Gogh, for instance, he didn't paint because of his mental illness. He painted in spite of his mental illness. There's then research and studies to talk about them. Well, what about the prevalence of mental illness in the creative arts? There's been some work on a group of writers to think about then how they had higher instances of depression and bipolar, and how also there was higher instances of their parents having experienced schizophrenia. Then there's the idea that creativity boosts mental wellness. If you imagine all the healthcare settings that you can think of where people are experiencing poor mental health, and the craft classes and the things that we ask people to create to kind of shift their focus and attention, to feel kind of really proud of themselves that they've created something. So we know that's true as well. For me, and the reason why I'm here today, my school of thought is that mental wellness is really going to help your creativity. Because generally, if we're mentally well, if we've got a great sense of well-being, we're more productive in life, we're more productive in a community, we're more productive in our work, and particularly if our work is within the creative sphere. So, to do that today, I've got some props. Now, I'm a trainer, that's kind of what I do by trade, and as Paul said, I'm a mental health first aid instructor as well. So, doing a speech like this is kind of a bit unusual, so I just thought I'm going to revert back to kind of what I know, and I've got a little box on the table that I want to show you. I want to talk to you and share with you the things that I do to enable me to have mental wellness, to enable me to bounce back from life's challenges. And later on in the sort of 10 minutes that you get after this, I'm hoping that you'll get the opportunity to think about what's going to be in your bounce back ability box. That's what I call it. So your strengths, your attitudes, your kind of those little things that you do to kind of keep yourself well. So I'm going to go over to my box now. What are my props? So my first prop is a pack of tissues. So, why a pack of tissues? Have we got any criers in the room? Awesome, yeah, big up the criers, okay? Crying is my absolute superpower, okay? Now, you think that's probably a bit weird, because when we're talking about mental health and you think about crying, you think about sadness, you think about depression, okay? And you're going to be right if that's something that persists, okay? But I use it to relieve my stress. It gets rid of those kind of stress hormones. It kind of makes me feel much better. Now, I've not always had a really good relationship, I guess, with crying. When I was much younger, kind of in my early 20s, I never cried. I wasn't a crier at all. Any non-criers in the room, you can, kind of get involved too in this, a couple, okay? And I felt it was a weakness, and I felt it was a level of vulnerability that I never actually wanted others to see in me. But equally, I didn't really cry in private. I was pretty tightly wound, okay? Then one time I was running my customer service department on my own, and it was a really stressful time. And a mate of mine threw a tea towel at me and said, "You all right? Cheer up, mate." I just sobbed. And I didn't stop for 2 whole days. I didn't go back to work, and I actually thought about quitting my job at that point because of the shame and the embarrassment, really, the fact that I cried. I now know better, okay? I now know for me that crying is a massive release. So for me to keep well, my sense of well-being, to have good, positive mental health, crying for me is really, really important. And that might be the same for some of you too. Next up, I've got a picture here of myself and 4 of my friends. The pink hair is here. The pink hair only went a few months ago. Friendships. Now, friendships for me, I am the only adult in my household. And there may be lots of you out there as well in a similar position to me. And so for me, my friendships are absolute key. They are my absolute support network. And what we know is about social connections that have a massive impact on people's sense of well-being. And there's been lots in the media about loneliness, and particularly through the pandemic as well. So social connections really make a big difference in people's lives. My friends are a shoulder to cry on. And obviously, I like crying. They're there to debate things with. They're there to kind of put me straight and go, "Come on, Annie, I really don't think that's right." But equally, they're there for me to have some fun with and to have some laughs and some joy and fun in our lives. Even to the point where often when we do go out together, you've got everybody in the restaurant kind of staring at us because we're being far too loud. So for me, friendships are really important. Okay, next up. For those at the back, this is a bent spoon, okay? I'm scanning the room to look at the ages of you in here to kind of see if anybody gets this reference. Who does this refer to? Uri Geller. Now, some of you are thinking, who the hell? I'm seeing some younger folk over here on this table. So, Uri Geller. Why on earth am I talking about Uri Geller? It's a bit of a random person to talk about. So, Uri Geller, for those of you who don't know, is an Israeli, he's still alive, isn't he? Israeli illusionist, TV personality, self-proclaimed prophet, fraudster, spoon bender, and mates with Michael Jackson. What can I say? The 80s was a weird and wonderful time. And in the 80s, I was, probably 10 or 12 or something, and I saw this interview with Uri Geller. Now, I am not making this up, okay, for the purposes of this speech. This is a genuinely true story. And he talked about positive mental attitude. And he called it PMA, and he's written a book about it and whatever. And for some reason, this interview has struck a chord with me for the rest of my life. And I'm a really big believer in positive mental attitude, to helping me reframe some of the negative thinking that might start to creep into our lives that can start to impact our mental health and our sense of well-being. For instance, this talk, when Paul first asked me to do this talk, my instant reaction was, "Are you shitting me? Why would anybody want to actually listen to me? No, thank you. I really don't want to do that." And that classic imposter syndrome set in that is really common, particularly for women of my age, where I just thought, I can't do this. I've been training for over 20 years. I put myself in front of people all the flipping time. What's the problem? So the first thing I then do is I have a bit of a word with myself, okay? Now, generally when we start talking about positive affirmations, okay, and personal mantras, We often talk in the first person. I'm brave, I'm competent, I'm beautiful, all of those sorts of things. Now for me, I talk in the third person. I kind of have a little word with myself, okay? So the first thing I did when Paul talked and asked me to do this was like, Annie, get a grip. You've got this. You can do this. And they're my two phrases that I use in my life. You've got this, and you can do this. For any challenges that I face, okay? And I'm a firm believer that really helps kind of push me through some of the things that have happened in my life. And trust me, I've had some pretty shitty things that have happened in my life. And I think trying to reframe, perhaps sometimes, how I think about that really does help. So I'm a firm believer in positive mental attitude. And for those of you that don't know anything about Uri Geller, you can Google him, find out who Uri Geller is. Next up is a sweatband, okay? And you're thinking, okay, why would this woman be bringing a sweatband onto the stage? So I want to talk to you about exercise. Now, clearly, at the moment, exercise isn't a high priority in my life at the moment, but exercise really does kind of boost your mood, and we know that, it's proven. It helps to improve your focus, it helps to improve your attention. Where are you all when you think of your best ideas? Tell me what you're doing. Walking, in the shower, swimming, it could be running, jogging. It's generally not in the boardroom, in the office, at work, when you come up with your most creative ideas. It's often when we are what we call at play and at leisure. And so exercise can be really, really good for you to be able to think about not only boosting your mood, but also to think about your creativity. So one of the things that I used to like to do in the gym was, I am not a cardio queen, okay? I'm not one of these folks that hits the gym, goes on the treadmill for an hour, gets all sweaty and gets off. I want to move some iron, okay? I want to lift and I want to feel like a beast, okay? The fact that I could lift 100 kilos off the floor, I could bench 50 kilos, it made me feel incredible. And what that meant was then, that feeling and those really feel-good kind of hormones that are kind of going on in my body after that exercise carried me through that day. And I was so much more bloody productive with my days when I exercise. So this, for me, is kind of a reminder that I need to get back in the gym. Because interestingly enough, this sweatband's actually got a chocolate stain on it. So it's all about balance, guys, isn't it? Yeah, it's all about balance. It's all good. It's all good. So we know that exercise really, really does help us within that. And then just very quickly, I wanted to talk about the impact of music on my life and my sense of well-being. And also kind of linking, I suppose, to what our bodies can do, and movement and dancing, okay? So anybody else like massive music fans? We've got some, yeah, okay. Generally, music kind of punctuates our life kind of in lots of different ways. And so I use music to boost my mood. I'm not going to stick a really sad playlist on you. I don't want to feel like that. So I stick something kind of uplifting on to kind of make me feel good. I'm a dancer. I don't mean professional, all right? I'm just a sort of a, you know the sort of meme, okay? I'm a woman of a certain age. This is the dance that we do, okay? Big fish, little fish, cardboard box, all that kind of stuff, all right? But I love it, and I love kind of how movement, exercise, and what my body can do actually makes me feel. Now, we were talking as when we went out for dinner last night that as a lot of us as speakers, we don't drink alcohol, and I don't drink alcohol, but I am the first on that dance floor, and I don't care what others think of me, and I think the freedom of movement and the joy that I get from it is amazing. And any of you that ever comes to my house and uses my downstairs loo, you will see that I've actually got the lyrics of Nana Cherry's Buffalo Stance written in permanent marker on my walls of my downstairs loo, because I got that on cassette when I was about 13 years old, and it's one of my favourite albums, which is called Raw Like Sushi. Check it out, okay, if you don't know it. So, the last thing that's in the box. This is a poem, and it's a poem called The Orange by Wendy Cope, and I'll read it to you in a minute. And the reason I've got this in here, because I want to talk to you about gratitude. And I think it goes along the same lines as the kind of the positive mental attitude that I talked to you about before, that sense of finding even the small things, being grateful for those small things in life. Now, gratitude and gratitude journaling, the real power in that is when you're having one of those really shit days, when you feel utterly battered and exhausted mentally and physically, and if you can sit down at the end of the day and note down something that you're grateful for, however small and tiny that might be. The fact that you were able to have that coffee in the garden this morning before the whole household got up. The fact that you've got food in your fridge. You know, all those small things that we can be grateful for. So I want to read you this poem called The Orange by Wendy Cope, because I think it's a really great example of this. At lunchtime, I bought a huge orange. The size of it made us all laugh. I peeled it and shared it with Robert and Dave. They got quarters and I got half. And that orange, it made me so happy, as ordinary things often do. Just lately, the shopping, a walk in the park. This is peace and contentment. It's new. The rest of the day was quite easy. I did all the jobs on my list and enjoyed them and had some time over. I love you. I'm glad I exist. And I just love that. And whilst I appreciate that poetry, we can interpret that in different ways. For me, that sense that orange, the fact that actually brought her some joy in that day, I think was so simple. And the fact that she recognises that just going for a walk and doing the shopping are things to be grateful for. And she ends the poem by saying, I love you, I'm glad I exist. And so giving ourselves some love and understanding, I think, is so, so important to that. So I want you to think about them in a moment, what's going to be in your bounce back ability box. But you might be thinking, well, this is all well and good, Annie. Yeah, it's great. But sometimes it's just not going to be enough. And sometimes we are going to need some help and support. What I would urge you to do, absolutely urge you to do, first and foremost, is please talk to somebody. If you're feeling a bit rubbish, if you're feeling that actually a low mood is persisting with you longer than perhaps it normally would do, talk to friends, talk to family, colleagues. If your work happens to have mental health first aiders, talk to your line manager, talk to anybody. There really is power in talking to people. Had a friend recently who told me that she was feeling quite low. She went to the doctors and the doctor diagnosed her with depression. She decided that medication wasn't for her. She didn't even want to go down the route of getting some counselling. And so I kind of kept checking in with her. And then we went out for a meal one day. And I said, how you doing? Just kind of checking in with you. And in the middle of this kind of local village pub, she just broke down in tears. And so I moved my chair kind of round to her side and I gave her a cuddle and a hug. And we were the last people in that pub and in that restaurant on that particular night. It's a bit like an episode of Friends when like Joey and Rachel are kind of stuck in the restaurant and the waiters are waiting for them to leave. She needed my time. She needed me to listen to her. And interestingly, recently, a couple of weeks ago, I caught up with her and kind of said, how are we doing? What's happening? And she said, you know what? That time when you listened to me, it really, really helped. She said, because I actually felt that I had talked about the real feelings that I was having and I expressed it in a way that made me realise I do need to do something and I do need to get some help. So don't underestimate the power of talking to somebody. Also think about then, do you need some professional help and support? Go to your GP, there's talking therapists out there. You can self-refer yourself to the IAPT counselling services as well. There's all sorts of help and support out there, and also there's information on websites and helplines too. Please don't suffer in silence if anybody's experiencing any mental health problems. But what I'd like you to think about them, so that was my experience, okay, that weird and wonderful collection of stuff that was in my bounce back ability box. Think about what's in yours then. What keeps you well? What keeps your sense of well-being high? What enables you to kind of bounce back from life's challenges? I want you to think of it a little bit like how we maintain a car. We don't wait until the car breaks down. We don't wait until it goes to the MOT and it fails. We're doing regular servicing on the car. Yeah, we're topping up the oil, we're filling up the tyres, we're filling up kind of the water in the car. I want you to think of yourselves like that as well. One thing that I was talking to somebody about earlier was that sometimes, particularly those of you that are parents, we give so much of ourselves, yeah? You know, think about all the different roles that you have in your lives. You might be a parent, you're a son, you're a daughter, you're a friend, you're a colleague, you're a manager, you're a, I don't know, a member of your local kind of football team. You're splitting yourself in so many different ways. And as the phrase goes, you can't always pour from an empty cup. And so I'm a firm believer in the fact that if you want to maintain your levels of creativity, if you want to maintain your levels of productivity in the roles that you're doing, then you need to work on yourselves and think about your mental health and just spend a little time on taking care of yourself. So it just leaves me to say, thanks so much. We had a bit of a sort of a split start, didn't we, at the beginning? But it's all good. And so really would like you to spend kind of the next 10 minutes when Paul kind of kicks that off for you, thinking about what's going to be in your bounce back ability box. Thanks very much.